Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blaine Girma. I'm currently a first-year PhD student with the Center for Environmental Justice, um, Community Engagement and Health at the School of Public Health at University of Maryland. Today, we're going to have a quick overview of environmental justice, wildfires, and heat, and specifically in Maryland, and have a discussion on what we can do now and next. So just a quick overview of our whole session. We'll start off with an overview of the impact of the Canadian wildfire crisis, then go in and discuss the health impacts of poor air quality and extreme heat. Then speak about potential missed opportunities to protect communities from extreme heat and poor air quality. And I'll bring up some examples of climate resilience strategies, and we'll do a quick visioning workshop. Hopefully, we'll be able to engage together either through the comments, or I have another way where we can collectively share our ideas on one page. If you have access to a computer, that would be great. And then we'll then come up with conclusions and takeaways from what hopefully we will discuss, and a time for Q&A as well. So the main objectives and what I liked for you all to take away from this workshop is to prepare yourselves as communities for future air polluting and extreme heat events, as I will speak about today. To identify current gaps in climate adaptation and resilience strategies, and envision strategies to take to build climate resilience in your communities. So before I get into a lot of the information I'm going to go over, I like to just bring up some key terms and definitions for you to keep in mind so we can naturally run through the presentation information I have for you. So first is particulate matter. Particulate matter refers to inhalable particles composed of sulfate, nitrates, ammonia, sodium chloride, black carbon, mineral dust, or water. It's not really important to know what those components are, but what's really important is that particulate matter, or PM, can be of different sizes and is generally defined by two different sizes, 2.5 micrometers and 10 micrometers. So the smaller particles, PM 2.5, those have the most impact on your health because they're able to be inhaled deep within your respiratory system and go into your bloodstream. But PM10 is also a particle size that is often found in a lot of air pollution coming from cars and other industrial sites. And then there's air quality index. This is an indicator developed by government agencies to communicate to the public how polluted the air currently is, or how polluted it is forecasted to become. So when you hear of AQI, this is normally what you see on your phone if you go onto the weather app and you look up what the air quality is like today. It is based off of this AQI, this index, but it's the original way that air pollution is captured is in a concentration, which might not make sense to the everyday person if they were to see the number and the concentration. So it's translated in a way that everyone can understand its impact. Then I will speak about extreme heat and the urban heat island effect. The urban heat island effect is going to be abbreviated as UHI. And so this is a phenomenon whereby cities experience higher temperatures than nearby rural areas. And this is because urban structures such as buildings, roads, and other infrastructure that absorb and re-emit the sun's heat more than normal natural surfaces. So this is why in the city, you're more likely to feel more than what is the recorded temperature of the air, because there's also heat that's bouncing off from the ground, which is usually like concrete, and you feel more heat. So built environment is defined as all structures made by man. So everything else is natural environment, like grass and trees and water bodies. Heat stress is defined as when your body can't get rid of excess heat, and symptoms of that is that your core body temperature and heart rate increases. So this is a general experience when someone is exposed to heat for a various amount of length of time, depending on their vulnerabilities. But once this heat stress comes into action, that's when other health issues can come about due to heat. And a couple policies to keep in mind is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And this is a federal law that authorizes historic investments in U.S. infrastructure, including roads, bridges, water, internet, and more. And the law was signed by President Joe Biden in November 15, 2021, and will increase federal spending on infrastructure by about $550 billion over the next decade. And Justice 40 initiative, which was signed in January 2021, also by President Biden, mandates that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. So these two policies will be key when we talk about how communities can come up with feasible solutions for their own community members when it comes to climate resilience. So I don't know if you, I'm sure many of you have been aware and watching the news and also stepping outside or looking out the window in early June. The U.S. had the worst air quality crisis in U.S. in the history, and this was due to wildfires that were burning and going on in Canada, our neighbors in the north. And large amounts of smoke, about 400 megatons of smoke was passing through and down the United States, and specifically over the Midwest and down the East Coast. So starting off, in New York was one of the big cases that everyone was showcasing on the news. But as you can see in this image, over June 6th to 8th, that cloud of smoke, that largest cloud of smoke had passed over the Mid-Atlantic region where we all are. And this had totally impacted 62 million Americans. And following that week or so, there were more instances of smoke passing, not as severe as this case, but there were continuous plumes of smoke passing by that made the air quality very unhealthy, especially for sensitive people, all the way even over here in Maryland and the Mid-Atlantic. And these wildfires are continuously burning to this day. And so we can foresee this being some kind of, background issue to add on to overburdened communities when it comes to air pollution in Maryland in the Mid-Atlantic. And so what was understood is that the wildfires are not something that were started by people, which is a lot of cases is what happens, but this is naturally a natural wildfire that is mostly has occurred due to the fact of climate change, and the increasing temperatures and droughting, causing trees to lose their water content and to be able to combust this much and this widely is linked to climate change. So our team over the summer had been able to read particulate matter data from our local purple air monitors that we actually have distributed among our communities in Prince George's County. And we were able to see that there is at the time where I had shown in the last image of the first week of June, we see the largest peak right here, up to above 40 micrograms per meter cubed, which is just the concentration. So this shows you how much the poor air quality had worsened beyond its baseline here. So, okay. I see James Wagner says, did it concentrate over Manhattan, or does the dark gray graphic represent air pollution already in New York City? No, so that image is specifically on June 6th, 7th, and 8th. So this is specifically I see what you're saying all over here. No, this was specifically images made by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, where they were specifically capturing the wildfire smoke. So this is purely only wildfire smoke that you're seeing. Okay. So when it comes to air quality, the EPA is given authority by what we call the Clean Air Act, which was initially enacted in 1963 and was intended to reduce and control air pollution nationwide. Today, we are still under the Clean Air Act that was amended in 1990. And this amendment was made to be able to have stronger and more relevant regulations when it comes to urban pollution, because that was becoming a clear issue. But the EPA's authority when it comes to the Clean Air Act, it has some I guess you would say barriers or some red tape to be able to regulate all kinds of cases of air pollution and how it impacts people in the United States. So there's something called the exceptional events policy. So during very events that weren't able to be prevented, or that one single person or entity did not create, like a natural disaster, this is considered like a natural disaster. The EPA doesn't have any, there's an exception to them being able to do something about it or hold someone accountable. And as I mentioned, these wildfires were thought to have been produced due to climate change. And so naturally, there's not really a way for EPA to be able to hold one person or entity accountable for climate change, which makes this a little bit of an issue. And also the fact that it's across the border, and EPA also doesn't have authority in other countries. So this then brings us to a place where the government and our laws might not always be able to protect us from the effects of climate change. And we need to come up with solutions to protect each other through our communities and local governments. So the Earth's global average temperatures have been increasing, and this is mostly driven by the industrial development responsible for spewing out greenhouse gases and trapping heat into our atmosphere. And in addition, these industrial developments have been going on for decades, and they have formed these built environments that I spoke about before. And these built environments and these industries compose of these built environments trap and amplify heat that is felt in these certain communities. And this is due to the urban heat island effect, as I mentioned. And so due to a combination of heat absorbing surfaces like concrete and dark pavement, and lack of trees and other vegetation, and heat generating activities like cars and generators, we've come to this situation where on July 6th, 2023, it was recorded to be the hottest day on the planet in ever recorded history. And at least 147 recorded heat-related deaths were recorded in only 5 counties. And some say that we can even estimate that there is about 30,000 cases that would be unrecorded of heat-related deaths in the United States due to what has already just occurred this summer. And another thing too that's unique about what's going on now and why heat is becoming more and more bigger of a deal is because unusually hotter temperatures are being experienced in more regions. So this means that places that have not been historically acclimatized or used to high temperatures are experiencing high temperatures and happening in like unexpected times where people are not able to prepare. And this brings us to a higher risk of more people being exposed to extreme heat and going through heat stress and going through heat-related illnesses and death. So this image here, it shows you that the more that we go into red is where there is a higher deviation from what is expected of temperature in those areas. So there's a large deviation of temperature that's going to happen in summers in the South especially, and also the Mid-Atlantic and up the East Coast. So these are places where we have to look out for more as the years go by and more summers go by. So thanks to my GIS specialist of our team, Eli, we were able to create some maps based off of land surface temperature data from NASA, I believe. And we were able to hone in and show the distribution of heat across Maryland this summer, while comparing summer of 2021, summer of 2022, and summer of 2023. So here is a map of Maryland and its surface temperature. And so you can see the blue is cooler, on the cooler end of the average daily temperature. And as you go more up in red, that is the hottest end of the average daily temperature during June. And so you can see where heat is concentrated. So this is in June 2021, and this is June 2022. There may be slight nuance or intricacies in the changes, but as we might be hard to see. But as we go into 2023, we can see how drastically temperature is increased in its distribution and is widely impacting more areas, more region, and more people. And we can see a similar effect. This is July 2021. This is July 22 and July 23. And then this is August 21, August 22. So it seems like in 22, the heat had come up more in August. And then this is August 23. So we can see that this summer, in what was recorded as the highest and the hottest summer in history on the planet, we can see why that is, and that definitely did impact our communities here in Maryland. So when we think of this extreme heat and everyone's being impacted by it, but before these extreme events have occurred, there are already many communities that are at a disadvantage already. And so we need to be able to make sure to hone in on those communities before and during these extreme events, because they will be especially more impacted and resources should be focused on them. So this image right here is a snapshot of some of Maryland, mostly PG County, and the red color signifies an EJ index number. So basically, the more red, the more these areas are being impacted by other EJ issues. So the score, just to give you some background, is based on pollution burden exposure, pollution burden environmental effects, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic or demographic indicators. So these are areas that are disadvantaged when it comes to climate resilience, because they're already burdened on all of these points. And so we can see when it comes to where is it most hottest and when was it most hottest this summer, is in the same area right here. So we can see a similar pattern of where there are disadvantaged communities and EJ communities and where there is the hottest areas. And so this is concerning because we can expect these communities to have been probably ill-prepared and most impacted, especially when it comes to health. And so you may be thinking to yourself, why is there such a pattern? So that brings me to some historical context. I don't know if many of you have heard of redlining, which is a practice that started in the 1930s, which was done all across the United States, where banks followed racist practices in determining what neighborhoods were deemed valuable enough to guarantee a mortgage loan. And so the general impacts of this historical practice, which is technically not in practice anymore today, still seems like there is that we can see an impact when it comes to especially the built environment of certain communities. So this map here explains that most of the heat islands in Baltimore, for example, this is a map of Baltimore, were also neighborhoods that were given a low grade and discouraged to invest in the 1930s. And this pattern is still very similar in other cities across the U.S. and probably throughout Maryland as well. So we can see that the white areas are areas that have more impervious surfaces, so more concrete, and also less shading. So the more white, the more we can expect the urban heat island effect to be in full effect there. And we can see by the outlining of red is what was the red lighting grade, the whole grade that was given for this area here, which was red, which is like the worst grade, a D. So we can see that the areas that were the least invested in the past are still impacted today because their built environments are set back in the past and not able to accommodate where our climate is going on and going towards today. And it happens to be that a lot of low income and communities of color happen to be pushed and kept, or these areas just end up being more affordable to live in. And so this causes for a disproportionate impact on health outcomes in these communities. So with exposure to higher and higher ambient temperatures and more frequently and amplified in urban areas, many are at risk of heat stress, as I mentioned before. So extreme heat can have various impacts on humans, and some are more obvious than others. So when we think of heat-related illness, I don't know if some of you have heard this term before. Most people speak of heat stroke, or even people who sadly pass away due to heat-related illness. Some might also think about, when they think about heat and how it impacts them on the day-to-day, they might think of how hard it is for people to think or to work in the heat because it makes them uncomfortable and exhausted. But there are potentially larger impacts by heat that are unnoticed as heat-related illness or directly linked to heat stress, especially on communities that are chronically exposed to higher temperatures in heat islands. So I like to explain it in this way: is more people are most likely experiencing heat, especially those in an urban heat island, are experiencing it chronically, but in a way where it's not as extreme, where they have to go straight to the hospital, but they're probably getting to the point a lot of times in the summer and in the months where they're extremely exhausted or dehydrated, or felt like they might have just passed out but took a break, went to get some AC to cool down in some AC or drink some water, and were able to recover. But that chronic experience throughout your life can have some impacts on your health. And it depends on many other issues and vulnerabilities in your occupation and all of that, and how frequently. But there are potential cumulative health impacts of extreme heat. And that also brings in the point I wanted to bring about particulate matter, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. Particulate matter especially the 2.5, the smaller size particulate matter, can go through your bloodstream and have health impacts throughout your body. And depending on how much you've been exposed, if it's chronically, if it's acutely, and depending on how much of an exposure you've had, will result in different health outcomes. And the interesting thing is that particulate matter and extreme heat have very similar types of health outcomes that can happen if people do end up resulting in an adverse health outcome. So with heat, there's potential risk for impact on cognitive function and mental health, on your respiratory health, especially those with asthma, and the same with particulate matter, and also cardiovascular disease for both heat and particulate matter, especially. So those are two major comorbidities that make you vulnerable to heat stress and exposure to particulate matter, is if you have some kind of respiratory illness or disease, or cardiovascular disease. Another potential health impact that has been seen in epidemiological studies are poor birth outcomes, such as specifically low birth weight and early labor. And this is both seen in heat stress and exposure to particulate matter. And when it comes to heat, renal disease is a big one, especially when it comes to people who work outside, or like farm workers, for example, people who are chronically, maybe daily, are going into dehydration every day, and their kidneys really take a hit due to this. So if they're experiencing this kind of dehydration daily, they can, result in kidney disease and kidney failure and things like that. And so as I mentioned, there is a cumulative health impact with particulate matter and extreme heat. And it has been shown in some studies that excess risk of death increases by approximately 21% on days with abnormally high temperatures and excess levels of PM2.5 in the air. So in cases like this summer, this is very important knowledge to have, because we have, as I mentioned, vulnerable communities due to environmental racism and historical practices and policies that have occurred in the past, and also vulnerabilities due to their current health comorbidities. And so moving forward, if we were to experience events like this again, we should keep this in mind when we are deciding who we need to protect. So specifically, some populations that are vulnerable to particulate matter and heat stress, both exposures have shared vulnerable populations, such as the elderly, children, pregnant women, people with asthma, people with cardiovascular disease, outdoor workers, and low-income communities. And specifically for heat stress, people with mental illness is one big one, and I feel like a lot of people don't speak about. Sometimes people with specific types of mental illness where they're not able to be aware during some episodes of their body temperature and whether they're overheating, whether they're going through heat stress. Those people are vulnerable, as well as people who take certain medications that reduce their ability to regulate body temperature. So those things are like antidepressants, anticholinergics or heart medications, antipsychotics, central nervous system medications, and insulin. And those most vulnerable to air pollution are smokers and industrial workers, so people who are daily, constantly exposed to pollutants in the air. Let me check if there's any questions. Okay. So, what can we do to stay safe as an individual and in taking care of your family? I would say keep all of these things in mind in using air conditioning and making sure that you change the filters in your air conditioning systems. They should be HEPA filters up to a certain grade number. I believe it's 13. And you must stay hydrated. You should avoid strenuous activity and staying outside for too long. Please keep your medications close if you're a member of one of these vulnerable community or vulnerable populations. Check your local air quality index. That's easily able to do on your phone through your weather app. And wear a mask, especially in cases where the air quality is really bad. So now I like to speak about some missed opportunities or potential opportunities for us to take moving forward to protect communities from extreme heat and poor air quality. So first is heat emergency planning. So heat emergency planning involves the development and implementation of strategies and actions to protect public health and safety during periods of extreme heat. These plans are typically created by state and local governments in collaboration with various agencies and organizations. So Maryland's extreme heat emergency plan, it has its own initiatives, or in their goals is to be able to issue heat warnings and advisory to the public, to work with utilities to ensure that there are no power outages, and coordinating with emergency responders to ensure they are prepared to respond to heat-related emergencies. Although they're one of their goals as to when it relates to opening cooling centers and reaching out to vulnerable populations, I believe this is one of their gaps in being able to have funding for cooling centers. Outside of cooling centers are mostly public, I guess, entities or buildings like libraries or I will stick with libraries or maybe potentially schools and all of that. But in cases of the communities that I have engaged with, a lot of times, especially in urban communities like in Baltimore, it's hard to find a cooling center close enough to you, or you might feel unsafe in your or in your way, in your path to getting there. It's maybe not very walkable to get to the cooling center. And so these are a lot of barriers when it comes to people being able to use cooling centers. And how they're doing their outreach with vulnerable populations and who they're trying to reach out to is also not very clear. And more guidance needs to be made on the implementation of their recommendations. So the state makes recommendations to agencies like the Department of Public Health on what they should be doing, but more guidance needs to be made on how that should be implemented. Another one is access to air conditioning. So according to the 2020 American Community Survey, approximately 12% of Maryland households do not have central air conditioning, and this number is higher among certain populations, especially in low-income households and households of color. This phenomenon, I would say, is pretty common in a lot of cities across the United States. And in a study by the Maryland Department of Health found that 25% of low-income households in Maryland did not have central air conditioning. And they also found that Black and Hispanic households were more likely to lack central air conditioning than white households. And so here are a number of factors that contribute to the gaps in access to air conditioning in Maryland. So one would be the cost of installing and maintaining air conditioning units. Air conditioning units can be expensive to purchase and install, and they also add to monthly energy bills. And so that makes it difficult for low-income households to afford air conditioning or to be hesitant to use their air conditioning units. Another factor is that that contributes to this gap is the housing quality, the quality of the housing stock that there is access to people. So there are many older homes and rental units that do not have central air conditioning, and this is because of also, again, the cost of installing air conditioning in existing homes can be prohibitive. And finally, the lack of awareness of the risk of heat-related illness and the importance of air conditioning can contribute to these gaps as well. So some people may not be aware of the dangers of extreme heat, or they might not realize that air conditioning is an important way to protect themselves from heat-related illness. So this information that I shared with you before we got to this point is really important, and it's very surprising how a lot of community members are not aware of the vast impacts of heat and how a very simple thing like air conditioning can keep them safe. Another barrier or missed opportunity to get to, especially in regarding to particulate matter and air pollution, is indoor air quality. So some big issues when it comes to indoor air quality. So when I say indoor air quality, that's within the home mostly, or within indoor environments. Big ones are radon. So radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas that can cause lung cancer. This isn't necessarily something that we can change, or that has a connection, a direct connection to climate change and climate resilience. But this is one big one that people, that communities should be aware of. Mold is another one. It's just very common in a lot of households. Mold is a fungus that can grow in damp or humid environments. Mold exposure can cause a variety of health problems, including respiratory problems, allergies, and asthma. And mold is a common problem in Maryland, especially during the summer months, because it is very humid here in the East Coast. And so that allows a lot of moisture to be trapped inside the home. Secondhand smoke is another major thing, especially throughout the whole United States. Secondhand smoke is a big indoor exposure to be worried about. Volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. These are chemicals that are released into the air from a variety of products, including paints, cleaning supplies, and air fresheners. And VOCs can cause a variety of health problems, including respiratory problems, headaches, and nausea. And VOC levels can be especially high in new homes and homes that have been recently renovated. So when we think about events like the wildfires, and where the air quality was completely unsafe even for a healthy person to experience outside. We can imagine if um, if this if this pollution most likely got into the homes, how that the cumulative impacts with already these other existing indoor air quality issues can make health worse. Um, Another big thing I want to bring up is there are cases where even local industrial sources, like in Curtis Bay in Baltimore, who are communities who are placed very close to industrial sites that produce a lot of air pollution, like coal dust. Curtis Bay is a community that is next to a coal terminal owned by CSX. And in the last couple of years, I believe there was an explosion of this coal terminal. And due to that explosion, to this day, community members still see coal dust visibly within their homes, on their all over their homes, outside and inside. And so we can imagine how that is to this day impacting these community members' health. And so common barriers to addressing indoor air quality is lack of awareness for the health impacts. So many people are not aware of the risk associated with poor indoor air quality, or they may not know how to improve their indoor air quality. Lack of access to affordable indoor air quality testing and remediation services. So indoor air quality testing and remediation services can be expensive, which can make them inaccessible to low-income households. Another barrier is lack of regulation of indoor air quality in certain settings, especially where there is a big opportunity for the government to take the reins. Like there are no state or federal regulations for indoor air quality in schools and childcare facilities. So this is a big one. Children are, as I mentioned, a vulnerable population. And so we should be concerned for, in this case, when it comes to indoor air quality, and then especially when we experience events like these wildfire plumes. And then disparities in indoor air quality. So certain populations, such as low-income households and households of color, are more likely to be exposed to poor indoor air. A lot of that has to do with the housing quality. A lot of older homes or not recently renovated homes or apartments lack good ventilation. So if any kind of indoor air contaminants are going around the home, there's no place for them to be ventilated outside. And sometimes there are gaps and cracks where smoke or some kind of air contaminant can go from one home and go into the next one. This is a common thing with secondhand smoke, for example. So these are potentially barriers, if not addressed, will then make these communities more at risk of the health impacts during extreme events like we experienced this summer. And the last is the built environment of urban heat islands and environmentally disinvested communities. So a lack of access to green space is one main thing. Green space, such as parks and trees, can help cool the air and reduce urban heat island effect. Trees are actually shown to also improve the air quality of the surrounding areas. So this would be a great opportunity to be able to tackle both heat and particulate matter. However, disinvested communities often have less access to green space than more affluent communities. Older housing stock. So as I mentioned before, housing in disadvantaged communities are often older and less energy efficient than housing in more affluent communities. And so this can make it more difficult and expensive to keep homes cool during hot weather. Okay. So we'll go on to talk about what climate resiliency strategies there are out there so that we can be able to come up with our own together. So there are first faith-based initiatives. So with increased federal and local government focus and funding on addressing these issues, such as the Justice 40 Initiative, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, which allow and encourage churches to apply for federal dollars to improve their energy efficiency. Organizations and coalitions like one of our partners, Green the Church, are a great example of faith-based initiatives or organization that start faith-based initiatives or support faith-based initiatives. Green the Church was designed to tap into the power and purpose of the Black church community and expand the role of churches as centers for environmental and economic resilience. So some specific examples of actions that faith-based organizations are taking or have taken to address climate change are investing in renewable energy, improving energy efficiency in buildings, educating their communities about climate change, and advocating for climate policies. Another type of initiative is community-based initiatives. So some examples of community-based initiatives are organizing community solar projects, providing weatherization services to low-income households. So weatherization services can help to make homes more energy efficient and reduce energy costs. Educating communities about climate change and what they can do to take action. Community-based organizations can offer workshops, presentations, and other educational events to teach residents about climate change and the steps they can take to reduce their impact, and advocate for climate policies at the local, state, and national levels. So there are a number of community-based climate initiatives in Maryland. And for example, one of our very close partners, the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition, is a network of organizations working together to ensure that all Marylanders have a healthy environment and a just and equitable transition to a clean energy future. There are also the Baltimore Community Action Partnership, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and the Maryland Solar United Neighbors, which is a nonprofit organization that works to make solar energy more affordable and accessible to Maryland residents. So these are some examples of what's out there, but there are so many, and I'm sure a lot of you know. So some local government initiatives, some examples are some examples of actions that local governments in Maryland are taking to address climate change are adopting climate action plans. So many of the local governments in every county have adopted their own climate action plans that outline their goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to climate change. investing in renewable energy. Local governments in Maryland are investing in renewable energy such as solar and wind power to reduce their carbon footprint. Improving energy efficiency in buildings. This is a very important one. So local governments are also improving energy efficiency in buildings by retrofitting them with insulation and other energy saving measures. Expanding electric vehicle infrastructure. This is a big one throughout the country. And promoting sustainable transportation options. So they're promoting sustainable transportation options such as public transportation, biking, and walking. And so local governments in Maryland are playing a leading role in addressing climate change. And by working together and through all the other initiative types that I mentioned, we can create a more sustainable future for Maryland residents. So that brings me to a visioning workshop that I would like for us to do. Hopefully it will be feasible over the internet and through this streaming. So I have a link to a Google Jamboard, but you can also write in the comments your responses, and I'll explain the instructions. Oops. Just want to check how much more time we have. Okay, so we have about this 15 minutes. Should be enough time. Okay, so you can follow that link, and there will be 3 sections of Post-it notes, a green, orange, and yellow. And they'll be titled, one is things that are working for us now. So you'll be talking about or giving your points on what things are working for us right now, or what are things that you know of that exist in your community, or in the organizations you're working for. What are they doing now in regards to this? And then a second group where you can add in points on challenges and issues you want addressed in your community. And then the third, new aspects or solutions you like to see in your community. So I like for you to envision, base your responses in envisioning strategies that can be taken to enhance resilience for populations at risk from heat-related and cumulative impact of heat and particulate matter, and focusing on the heat emergency planning, access to air conditioning, indoor air quality, and adaptation mitigation strategies for heat islands. Okay, it's only view only. Okay, let me fix that. I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, you should have access now. Let me repaste this. Let me know if you can access it now. So in 10 minutes, I'll check back in. You can also add your thoughts in the comments. I see some people have added. I'll put the prompt here. Still only view. Try and exit that and follow this link. In the meantime, you can also ask any questions you may have. Okay. You're also welcome to add more post-its. There's more people who want to add more. If there's not enough room, there is an option to add a page on the top. Okay. Okay, it looks like people are done. I'm just gonna share this Jamboard. So people have said that some things that are working for us now are increased public funding to support community-based organizations. Yes, that is a big one. And other type of expanding that to faith-based organizations is really great. And opportunities like the symposium to share ideas. Yes, totally. Um, some challenges and issues that you want to address in your community, more education. Um, so people may make more informed decisions in their best interest, and starting with K through 12. Yeah, that is something I had spoken about with my colleague, and that it's going to be really important to bring these topics up to school age children, and getting them in getting this information to their minds when they're younger. Um, yeah. And reducing the cost of air conditioning so it's more affordable. This is a good one. There's a weatherization assistance program through Maryland. Um, Basically, if you fall under a certain income level or you receive certain benefits from the state, that they can help you get free air conditioning. Um, I need to look into it more in that if they would also help you with the energy costs. I feel like it's the energy cost that is a big one. Um, More green areas in my community since there is so much construction, which removes a lot of the green areas already. That are already existing. Yeah. Um, like a big contentious thing is like, we have all this beautiful greenery in Maryland, and it's competing with a lot of the expansion of a lot of institutions like our school, University of Maryland. And that balance of being able to conserve green spaces as our cities expand with other economic priorities of other institutions. Um, yeah, so then new aspects or solutions you like to see in your community: more people riding bikes and driving less. Yes, that is a very good one. Um, mhm. Stop development, yeah. And then we have sitting outside when it's hot instead of using AC. Um, I would say in some cases this might work out, and I feel like this is a very common practice for a lot of families when it is hot outside. Um, I know I used to do that. I'm from the West Coast in Los Angeles, and we didn't have air conditioning at home. So when it was really hot, sometimes it's actually cooler outside because old houses or apartments, I don't know if something up with insulation or the way they're built, sometimes they hold on to the heat indoors. So sometimes it helps to sit outside. But when it is unbearably humid outside, um, especially if you have like asthma, respiratory diseases, it gets really hard to breathe. And without AC, sometimes you can't control that humidity that you're experiencing. Um, Stop drinking bottled water. That might touch on some cumulative impacts when it comes to being exposed to microplastics. I don't know if that's where you were going with that. I have my handy dandy reusable bottle, which I would encourage everyone to use. But at the end of the day, if you're dehydrated and stuck in heat, I will always prioritize getting your hands on bottled water. So whatever you have at hand, please drink water. And policies that protect workers exposed to the urban heat island, like landscaping and construction. Yeah, occupational exposure to extreme heat is a big one. Like I said, farm workers, construction workers, male persons. Yeah, those are really, really vulnerable populations that we see every day, who make our lives easier every day, and who might be really impacted as these temperatures increase. Text and TV alerts for heat and emissions events, like the CSIC explosions, so people can shelter immediately. We do this for Amber Alerts. Yeah, this is something that the state, from my research, are trying to do or have done. But maybe there's some gaps in the way that they share the information and outreach, or at what point are they triggered to send alerts is another point for us to discuss or think about. Turn lights off, especially at night. Yes, that definitely helps keep indoor temperature cooler. Okay. Thank you so much for everyone who were participating this way. I wasn't really sure it would work out well, so I'm really glad. Is there, for the last couple of minutes, is there anyone who has any questions? Oh, James had mentioned, no, the bottle and filling it in a factor requires energy. Use a reusable bottle or thermos. Okay. Yes, you're also thinking about the industrial, how the industry of creating plastics is contributing to climate change as well. I see that. So any last questions? All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you all learned something and were able to take something away from this. And doing this in your own communities and families, sharing information like this and sharing ideas, I highly encourage you to go out and do that. Thank you, everyone, for also attending the symposium. All right. Have a good day.